Loki, the trickster, the resident troublemaking little shit of Asgardr. He's not the only trickster god to be found in our world. Hell, he's not even the only trickster in the Norse pantheon. But he definitely built the blueprint for the archetype. It's impossible to overstate just how crucial a role Loki plays in Norse mythology. He's often described as a Satan-like figure, though it's a lot more complicated and tragic than that. Loki's true origins are known only to him and his blood brother, Odin. In the stories, he just kind of pops up after Odin is established as king of Asgardr. Whether this is because there was never any official origin story for him, or because it was lost to time, I can't say. But I assume that Loki assisted Odin in a battle or war against his own people, the Jotnar, the rival race of gods that opposed the Aesir. Whatever Loki did for the Raven god, it created a bond between the two that led to them taking a blood oath to always stand side by side, and to never taste a drink that the other is not also served. This is what allows Loki to join the Aesir despite coming from their supposed enemies. This is what allows him to be a menace in Asgard. Whilst Loki doesn't have a real origin story, we do know that his mother's name was Laufey, or alternatively Null, and she was either a Jotun or an Aesir goddess. It's a little unclear. Though chances are best that she was an Aesir. To support this, Loki's full name is often seen as Loki Laufeyson, which is unique because it's matronymic, as opposed to the traditional convention of taking your father's name. This suggests that she was seen as having higher standing than his father, which, if she was an Aesir, would make sense. Though it might not be that deep, it might just be for the alliteration. The Norse like that in their poems, and Loki Laufeyson works a lot better than Loki Farbautisson. Despite all of this, Loki is still considered a Jotun because of his father, Farbauti. So, while he carries his mother's name, his status and racial heritage is still passed down by his father. This is why other gods whose mothers are Jotun and their fathers Aesir are still considered Aesir gods. His mother is assumed to have been quite skinny and frail. This is because of the name Null, meaning needle, which kind of instills that idea. But her other name, Laufey, is thought to mean full of leaves or leafy island or something like that, suggesting connection to nature, specifically trees. Combined with his father's name, which means dangerous striker, it's thought that the two together are supposed to evoke the image of lightning striking a tree, the destructive flame created being Loki. Now, I do need to put a big asterisk on this part, because whilst in modern depictions Loki is heavily associated with fire, there's not really any foundation for that in the old texts. It's a much more recent addition to the mythology, and quite possibly part of Christianization, trying to draw a line between him and Satan, although him and the devil don't really have much in common. But even though there's no actual basis for a connection to fire, I thought I'd include it anyway, because I really like the symbolism of it. He also has two brothers, Helblindi and Bileister, but there's not really much to know about them, and they're not even the slightest bit important. The only thing really worth noting is that some believe that Helblindi might be an alternative name for Odin. The Blindi part means blind, which falls in line with a lot of Odin's other names, which are often referencing his missing eye. And the Hel part is obviously reference to the realm Hel, the underworld, which then connects it to death, which Odin is also heavily associated with. Either way, it doesn't really matter. In Asgard, Loki has a ride-or-die Aesir wife named Sigyn, and two sons named Nari and Narfi. His sons' only roles in the mythology are to suffer for the sins of their father, but that's a story for another day. But like every other god, he's had plenty of children outside of his marriage, primarily with his Jotun lover, Angrboda. Together, they have 3 children: Jormungandr, the grand serpent big enough to surround our entire world, Midgardr; Fenrir, the giant monstrous wolf; and Hel, the ruler of the underworld, also called Hel, or Helheim if you want to be less confusing, the receiver of the souls who do not die in battle. These 3 grow to become the deliverers of Ragnarok, the end times, the destruction from the fire that came from the strike. Loki is also the mother of Odin's horse, Sleipnir, who was conceived when Loki, in an attempt to fix a mess he was being blamed for, shapeshifted into a mare and led a crazed stallion on a long chase, which presumably ended in a way that I think it's best your parents explain to you. Afterwards, Loki gave birth to Sleipnir and gifted him to his blood brother. Like the other gods, there's mention of other possible children, some of which he gave birth to while disguised as a woman, but most of them don't have names and are just brought up as a way to insult him. There's also a couple of times in which Loki claims to have sired children with the wives of other gods, but knowing Loki, he probably just says that to piss them off. But also, knowing Loki, he would absolutely do it to piss them off. Like the rest of the gods, Loki doesn't have any detailed descriptions, though he's often described as very handsome and fair. It's thought that his body was long and slim, like his mother's. And I've seen a lot of suggestion that his hair was either red or strawberry blonde, coloured like fire. And while that is how I personally picture him, there isn't any actual evidence of that in the Eddas. They don't really bother with that level of descriptiveness. There is a depiction thought to be him on a hearthstone in Denmark, in which he has a moustache. Though these enchanting looks might be somewhat damaged by a couple of defacements. Around his lips are scars that were left after his mouth was sewn shut. This happened because he made a bet with two dwarves, Brokkr and Eitiri, in which he offered them his head. And when he lost the bet, being a slimy little cunt, made the stipulation that while yes, he did offer them his head, his neck was not part of the deal, and they weren't allowed to sever it. So, instead of killing him, the dwarves sewed his lips shut, and when Loki tore the stitching away, it left permanent scarring. It's because of this incident that one of his killing names is Scarlip. And also, while there isn't any depictions of it, because Ragnarok is the end of the mythology, I highly doubt that the poison that drips on his face while he is bound left his face undamaged. There are a few things that depict him having horns, but this is a Christian edition, again to connect him to the devil and ingrain their mythology, and not actually part of the Old Norse lore. The ability Loki is best known for is his shapeshifting, being able to take the forms of just about any animal or person, even those of the opposite gender. Although shape-changing is kind of just a typical ability for the Jotnar, so this is just something that is part of who he is, as opposed to something he studied and mastered. There's a bunch of characters all across the mythology that are seen with the ability to shapeshift or disguise themselves, usually with a spell or some enchanted article of clothing. But the way I read it, Loki, and incidentally all the Jotnar, are much better at it and can do it almost naturally. They can just do it whenever they want, it's just part of being a Jotun. This ability to change forms is his go-to solution for the majority of trouble he gets himself and the other gods into, whether it be to hide from someone who is chasing him, or to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. Loki usually relies on his cunning to get himself out of a sticky situation, but that doesn't mean he's helpless in a fight. For a weapon, he wields Havertane, though scholars later amended the name to be Lavertane, a weapon of his own making. Its descriptions vary wildly, from being a sword to a saber wand, or even a dart. This is mainly because the two names mean different things, and also the flowery way the Norse like to describe things in their poems. Like, yes, it is described as a wand or a stick, but this might just be a sort of cheeky way of talking about a sword. But I like to think, because it is Loki's weapon and it was crafted by him, it imitates his talent for deceit, morphing between forms much like he does, and being able to serve multiple purposes. Or perhaps to lull an opponent into a false sense of superiority and trick them into expecting the wrong attack. Now, before I'm hung, drawn and quartered, there is no basis for that. It's just an idea pulled out of my arse to explain why the descriptions vary. As for any other interesting relics or weapons, Loki is sorely lacking, though he is responsible for the creation of a lot of items possessed by other gods, usually as a way of making amends for being a dickhead. When he pranked Thor's wife, Sif, by cutting off her hair, he was forced to commission the legendary dwarven smiths, the Sons of Ivaldi, to create her a replacement wig out of gold. Along with the wig, the dwarves made Odin's spear, Gungnir, and Freyr's ship, Skidbladnir. After this, he boastfully wages with two other dwarves, Brokkr and Eitiri, that they cannot match the master craftsmanship of the Sons of Ivaldi, which leads to the creations of Gullinbursti, the gold-bristled boar of Freyr, Draupnir, the armouring of Odin, and Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor. And despite Loki's attempts to sabotage the dwarves, their work met the quality of the Sons of Ivaldi and they won the wager. This is the bit I mentioned earlier, which led to the dwarves sewing Loki's lips shut, so he may boast no longer. Loki is often described as a master of illusion, though, in the Eddas, he doesn't really display this other than the shapeshifting. Although, with one of Lavertane's possible forms being a wand, it suggests that he does utilise sorcery in some way or another, but there's no examples of him actually doing so. But there is a story in the Prose Edda which features a Jotun called Utgarda Loki, which roughly translates to Loki of the Outlands, suggesting the name Loki might actually be a title, but definitely drawing a connection between the two, one possibly lost to time. But the important thing is, Utgarda Loki is an illusionist. He is the one that has Loki enter an eating competition with fire itself, but he changes the god's perception to see the fire as a person. He casts illusions on his own body to make himself appear much larger than he actually is, to prevent Thor from striking him on the head with his hammer. He makes Jormungandr, a serpent big enough to encircle the entire world, appear as a tiny house cat. He also makes Thor drink from a horn that turns out to be the entire bloody ocean. So while Loki doesn't demonstrate any illusions in the old stories, this guy he shares a name with definitely does. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities that Loki is an illusionist too. Okay, so now I've upset the academics enough that they're no longer watching. I'm going to talk about his ability to control fire. Now, like I said before, this association with fire doesn't actually have any legs to stand on. And in fact, in one of the stories, he's actually seen failing to start a fire. But to that, I say that the whole point of that story is that there's a Jotun using magic to prevent him and his companions from cooking any food, in order to bait Loki into falling into a trap, so he may be used as a pawn. It doesn't expressly say that a Jotun tampers with the fire, just that he prevents their food from cooking, but it can be interpreted as him meddling with the flame. So maybe Loki's failure to start that fire was also part of that Jotun's magic, and him being the one to try and start the fire suggests that maybe he does it often. Taking that into account, and looking at the fact that Utgarda Loki has flames acting on his behalf, there is some loose precedent that Jotnar have some magical way of manipulating fire. And we know the main thing he's known for, shapeshifting, is a common Jotnar talent, so, it's there. You can have it if you push. It's not a ludicrously far reach, alright? Right now I feel a little bit like Charlie Kelly in that One Always Sunny meme. Now, if you listen carefully, boys and girls, you can hear somewhere there's a scholar crying. Ultimately, Loki's primary tool is his mind, his cunning. His silver tongue is what he uses to get himself and the other gods out of trouble, though half the time it's also what gets him into that trouble. I love Loki. He's my favourite funny little guy. Because even though after the Christians turned up he got heavily associated with the devil, he's really not like that at all. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that he's not a slimy little cunt. But before his children are imprisoned and he, kills Balder, he doesn't really act out of malice at all. He's just a cheeky little shit, doing things for a laugh. And even when he does fuck up and gets the Aesir into trouble, he's also the one that usually gets them out of that trouble, sometimes at his own detriment. So clearly he's not evil. He's a Jotun living with the Aesir, the sworn enemies of his people. I can't exactly blame him for being a bit of a prick sometimes. And being Odin's blood brother kind of gives him diplomatic immunity. Who wouldn't take advantage of that? But ultimately, I find Loki's story rather tragic. If he is the devil, he's certainly closer to the one represented in Paradise Lost, or the one played by Tom Ellis. Everyone always blames him when something goes wrong, even if there are others that are just as guilty. It's him that gets threatened with death if he doesn't fix it. And while yes, his actions do lead to the end times, those actions are a response to others' actions. It's Odin, his own blood brother, that outcasts Loki's children and imprisons them for crimes they hadn't even committed yet. To me, their stories are of having their identities built for them, and then being condemned for fulfilling those prejudices. When you tell a man, over and over again throughout his entire life, that he is a monster, eventually he'll decide it's easier to believe you. And in that equation, who's truly responsible for the fire?